Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got my crew with me, my normal two guys, and then we've got a special guest, Harvey Green, one of the lead sales engineers here at XenTegra. Harvey, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Hope you are too.
Still holding down the fort in the home office basement. You're in the basement, right?
I am.
Are you ready to get out of the basement? You got to be ready to get out of the basement.
I actually did get out of the basement for just a little bit today, hence the collar for once.
Oh, you're to a customer?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nobody invited me to go see a customer.
Yeah,
So we have Jaira Cox with us. Jaira is also Jaira, are you officially a sales engineer?
Yeah. Yep. That's me. I'm an SE.
Okay.
Officially and unofficially and any other way.
Yeah. I didn't know. I said that a while ago, and the guy's like, "No, I'm an architect. I'm a post-sales architect," and that's my fault for not getting that right.
Oh no, it's all good. Systems engineer, sales engineer, pre and post sales, and everything. So I don't do formal delivery, but I certainly that doesn't mean I don't get asked about it.
Yeah. Do you miss you did formal delivery at some point, right?
I did. I did it for about 3 years as a VAR, and of course, as a regular admin on an on-call rotation before that as a customer. And I miss a little bit of it, right? You get encouraged to do different kinds of certs with that as your 9 to 5. Don't miss the on-call rotation. Is my biggest quality of life improvement.
Well, and based on what you told us about your lab the other day, and also listening to the tech podcast in the shower, I promise I'll never bring that one up again.
Right. I believe you.
I told my kids that at the dinner table, and they didn't think it was as funny as I did. But your lab, you have a pretty extensive lab, either now or you did, and you can keep yourself pretty tied in if you do that, right?
Oh, for sure, right. And we all sort of in our day job, right? We get broad enough that a healthy mixture of environmental and industry knowledge can be more valuable than going deeper on kind of one certification domain often.
Yeah. Well, guys, we have our special guest with us, Jarian Gibson. Jarian and I have known each other for, about 10 years now. He's part of the small world of end-user compute, or at least was, or still is. You always are, right? You never get away from it. But Jarian, what's your title now, and what are you doing at Nutanix?
Yeah, hi, and thanks for having me today. So my official title at Nutanix is Staff Solutions Architect, and I'm still in end-user computing space, so that's what I focus on at Nutanix. So within our team, we're on the EUC engineering team, and so every day I'm working with, I'm mainly focusing on Citrix on Nutanix. So when you go to our websites and look at things like the reference architecture guides or the best practices guides, that's what our team does. So we do a lot of testing, a lot of hands-on stuff with that, looking at performance and so forth, and then putting those into our RAs. Anything as far as best practices of running Citrix on Nutanix, but also to working with our plugin team to do any enhancements, updates, or fixes needed for the plugins for AHV to interface with Citrix.
Yeah. So quick question on that, a couple of things. One, we haven't talked a whole lot in the last year or so, but XenTegra, I promise, is the most adamant Citrix Nutanix partner you have. We think it's a no-brainer. Harvey runs around with a block and does his workshops either for customers or does them online. I mean, we just absolutely love hyperconverged, specifically Nutanix hyperconverged for Citrix workloads. And part of it is that magical plugin you just talked about. Has there been any talk about getting that plugin part of the Citrix code, or you guys like it separate the way it is?
So before I answer that, I'll kind of go of the pros and cons of the plugin being integrated versus the plugin being separate. So so far, our plugins have been separate from the Citrix code base. One of the bonuses of that is that we can update any issues out of band instead of having to get inside of the current release or LTSR release schedule. So when it comes to on-premises deployments of AHV, it kind of makes sense because if a customer reports an issue or something changes in Citrix, we can easily update those plugins and the customer can roll those out on their time. Now, when it comes to the virtual apps and desktop service, building that plugin in does make sense because you have to actually install that plugin on all cloud connectors in the cloud tenant, regardless if AHV is deployed or not. So there's trade-offs on both sides of that. But the main thing is we are in discussions with Citrix on how we can better collaborate, how we can better do things with our plugins integration. And that's where I'll stop because I don't want to slip up and say anything I'm not supposed to say.
That's all right. That was. I think the answer was, oh, you're a consultant. Your answer was maybe, or it depends, or we're thinking about it. We're talking about it.
I'll say stay tuned.
All right. Well, let us know because and look, this is our first podcast with you, but Citrix on Nutanix. That is our baby. We love it, and keep us up to date on everything coming. And the minute you tell us you want to be a part of a podcast, man, we want to have you on. That is the best. I know Nutanix out of the gate came out with Citrix and VDI, and that was a big play, and it still is. But that is our play. We love that play, and we're still as passionate about it today as we were the first time we ever saw it come together for the first time.
Good to hear, and I'll be happy to come back on once we have some major updates on things we're working on. You
guys old enough to remember the your chocolate fell in my peanut butter fell in your chocolate? That's Citrix and Nutanix. It just makes a ton of sense. So, Jarian, the topic today is how you guys were able to take a Citrix environment integrated with Nutanix on AWS and get 2,000 users, 2,000, I assume, VDI desktop users up and running in 2 hours. You want to walk us through what you're covering in the intro of the blog?
Yeah, so the main thing with this blog is to show our users, number one, clusters. So clusters is something new that we released where we can take AHV and run that on bare metal nodes inside of cloud infrastructure. So our first release of clusters is on AWS. And in this blog, I'm basically showing you how to easily extend your on-prem environment. So think of it as a DR or bursting to quickly enable additional workloads if you don't have the on-premises hardware to be able to do that. So think about now with the work from home and the pandemic where a lot of things shifted to remote working and some customers did not have the footprint to do that. So clusters and showing how quickly that you can spin up additional desktops can help alleviate that issue.
And Jarian, this is specifically on AWS, but maybe by the end of the year, this will Azure, GCP, it won't matter. Is that a realistic time frame, or are we talking longer?
So we've announced Azure already, and I believe it's in early access right now, and hopefully that'll be coming sooner than later. And then once Azure is in GA, that's when we'll start looking at other clouds as well, Google and possibly others. But I don't have definite time frames because, as you know, things can change based on issues with integration and that kind of stuff. And that's why AWS was our first deployment, because they had the ability for us to use their APIs to directly provision, scale up, scale down, deprovision clusters without a bunch of work. And so we're still working with Microsoft to make sure we have the proper hardware, the proper APIs and capabilities to make it just as seamless as AWS is.
Yeah, I think that topic, Nutanix on Azure, Nutanix on AWS, that comes up almost every day for us these days.
Yeah, I think every time I talk about clusters, I'm asked about Azure, and trust me, that one's the next one coming.
Right. I think in general, right, we're always behind the maturity of anyone's offering for hardware as a service, right, which kind of wasn't one of the, one of the first cloud-enabled APIs that anyone went to launch, right? So.
Yeah, it's almost counter cloud, but at some point it started to make sense, especially when you take a cloud operating system like Nutanix and basically go to those cloud environments and say, hey, I don't want to tell you your baby's ugly, but I think mine's better, and all of a sudden you got something. Well, I can say that. I don't know if you guys can say that.
Right.
Maybe
it's being consultative and always having a solution to every problem is valuable, right?
Yeah.
Well said.
Which ones are you guys? Harvey, anything else you want to highlight before we have Jarian drop into a little bit more of the content here?
No, I'm good to move forward. I like to hear it. I love this topic, and I want to hear more.
Okay. So, Jarian, you got a couple of bullets here. Do you want to talk about the first bullet? Talks about Citrix virtual apps and desktops on Nutanix clusters offering the familiar familiarity our Citrix admins are used to.
Yeah, so just us being able to take AHV and put it the same software, the same look and feel, the same integration points. It's just instead of on hardware that you purchase, it's on AWS hardware. That's where it's the exact same familiar administration, same Prism console, same plugins. There's no change. And one thing that that's not in this blog as well is that this demo does show machine creation services, but we also fully support provisioning services as well on clusters and AHV. So no one else is doing that yet in public. I know Citrix announced an Azure offering coming soon that they announced in one of their days about a preview for that. But right now, we're the only ones doing PVS in the cloud, and we can do that because, again, it's just AHV. There's nothing different. We're not refactoring anything. We're not changing anything. We're just basically taking AHV and putting it on hardware in AWS.
Yeah. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, those were fighting words, right? PVS versus MCS.
Right.
Yep.
But I do still find it interesting when I hear somebody adopting Nutanix on premises or in the cloud now talking about PVS. Is there one or two specific reasons why you think people still do that versus using machine creation service?
A familiarity. So if they've grown up in PVS, sometimes it's harder for them to change. That's what they've known, what they're used to, and they want to stay in that lane. Other times too, MCS does not have all the capabilities that PVS has. With Nutanix, we do fix the provisioning and the scalability, and we make MCS better with shadow clones and data locality. But provisioning services still has that reboot to roll back. They still have that easy image portability and so forth. So usually larger environments, I see customers stick with it. Sometimes as customers come over from other platforms to Nutanix, they start switching from PVS to MCS, but I think for the most part, it's a preference these days.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, another place that I see it still hanging out is when you have siloed shops, which to Jarian's point is the bigger customers. You've got those permissions that are split, and sometimes being able to do provisioning services is the only way that the Citrix team can maintain their full image lifecycle.
Yeah, I think another thing to add to that too is that a lot of conversations I have with customers that are going over the MCS versus PVS, I'm not going to say debate, but decision, is that they tried MCS early on other platforms and they got a bad taste in their mouth. So they still keep that impression on them about it, and they don't really look at it coming over to AHV or even Nutanix in general and showing how we fix things with our software.
Hey, Jaira, are we boring you with this PVS MCS stuff?
No. I mean, I learn from every time I hear it. Right? It's I know our perspective that in general, MCS is sort of the recommended, like, find a reason not to use it kind of approach. Right. But no, the deep nuance I don't have, and I love hearing about it.
Do you remember when you were a kid and the first time you saw the magician do something really crazy, like saw a person in half, and how amazed you were?
Yeah.
That's how we all felt the first time we saw provisioning services and that Harlem Globetrotters video, like, you're kidding. And then there it goes.
Yeah. I mean, the few times I've had to help customers with it, which really meant, like, I was in the room and I was sending Jarian emails and Slacks on the back end. So it was really still Jarian helping them, was like, they were familiar with, like, hey, what if we have a bad patch and how we roll back? They felt like PVS was faster than MCS, but even that is really familiarity, not actual technical comparison.
Right. And there's a huge difference, to Jarian's earlier point, there's a huge difference in doing that on other platforms versus doing it on Nutanix, where there are actual tools and things that are built into the OS to make that happen faster.
All right, so second bullet here in the meat of the topics here, Citrix Virtual App and Desktop on Nutanix clusters enables customers to scale quickly their on-premises workloads into the clouds. Jarian, that's kind of the substance of this entire blog, right? How fast you guys were able to do it without reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, so with this, we showed the exact process of going through. Now, in our demo, we're already connected to our Durham lab already for some of the infrastructure pieces. So we had an existing VPC that was already connected back via VPN. But once you have those basic things in place, you can just spin up a cluster inside of that VPC. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes, no matter the cluster size, because everything's done in parallel operations. Once that's up, we start using our protection domains to replicate the master image over. Once the master image is there, restore it, take a snapshot, and then go through the MCS process using Studio to do that. So that's how quick and simple it is. It'd be the same thing if you stood up a secondary cluster in an existing data center or in a secondary data center, the same exact process, nothing different. It's all the same.
Yeah. Well, Harvey, we saw this with a customer a couple weeks ago. Like, they got their cloud cluster in about an hour as it all got deployed for them. And then, they were able to replicate their VM template, their gold master image. Yep. Basically, I can't imagine what could have been faster, right? It was just instantly like connect and go. And then they had that same template available for them in the cloud.
Yeah, I don't know many situations where you can say, well, we're going to build out DR, and by the end of day one, you actually have something measurable.
Yeah, or maybe by lunch, which is how I measure time.
Yeah.
Because you're not having to refactor. Because think about it, if you're going to bare metal in AWS, Azure, GCP, whatever, you have to refactor that master image. We're taking the same master image, not having to change anything, and just pushing it over. Another thing, too, customers don't realize from this article is that we also support cross-hypervisor. So if you're vSphere on-prem, you can still do the same exact process. We'll inject our tools for AHV into it, replicate it over, and the exact same thing will happen whether you're AHV or vSphere on-prem.
Yep, I think that's a huge point, too. That gets into a lot of the conversation around what you have to actually invest in order to do a DR type scenario or a secondary data center type scenario. You don't necessarily have to completely make it the exact same. You do have the option with Nutanix to use AHV.
Mm-hmm. And Harvey, you were on the call with the customer this morning, right? If we just had Nutanix clusters on Azure, it would have been like, yes, done. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Right?
I am completely waiting on that. I've got people waiting in line with me, I'm sure.
Yeah. Come on, Jarian, get it done.
Well, hey, the more you have requests for Azure, let us know so we can let the PMs know so they can, hopefully get that process rolling faster if possible. Because they're looking for customers that are looking for Azure to do this with. So let us know and we can make sure we know the product team knows that.
Okay, well, we can get you a list of those. This next part talks about Nutanix clusters allowing you to grow, right? Grow within the cloud really easily using familiar concepts that you already have as a Nutanix on-premises customer. Is that what that's really talking about? This I guess third bullet here.
Yeah, for the most part, the only difference with clusters is that we do have our clusters portal to where it goes through and you create the cluster, you expand the cluster, shrink the cluster, hibernate it, wake it up, and destroy the cluster. But once any of those operations are done, everything else is done in Prism. So for EUC workloads, we mentioned that you have to start off with a minimum of 3 nodes. And then from there, you can expand the node at a time. So, have the 3 nodes for your pilot light. And then as you need more capacity, you can add a node at a time. And then once you don't need that capacity anymore, you can shrink down to 3 nodes, hibernate it. And that way you're not incurring compute costs for those nodes.
So so as opposed to on-premises where you buy 3 nodes and then you buy 4 and then you buy 5,
mm-hmm.
When you decide you don't need the 5th, you can't just take it back to Target, right?
Yep, exactly. No refunds.
You know what? That's okay. So let me make sure this is going to make sense. So that's really important. Oh, you guys are going to love this conversation, I hope. So literally my wife and 2 daughters, they're buying bathing suits this time of year and you can't go try them on anymore. You got to buy 8 different bathing suits, bring them all home and then bring them back, the ones you don't want.
That's what I did. Sorry, too easy. Go ahead. But don't think about it.
It's a similar thing, right? It's a similar thing where the cloud makes it easy to try it right then and there and give it back if you don't want it and go get it again. And then we kind of used to do that at Target, right? We could just go try a whole bunch of stuff on. Now we got to bring all of it home, bring it back. It's just the cloud's enabled it to be so much better. And now Nutanix is allowing you to have that option of use it and then give it back. I mean, look, I know you guys all know somebody in your life that wore something somewhere and then left the tags in it and brought it back.
Yep.
That is now like normal and right. It's okay.
Which is weird. That's a weird point. But
No, it's easy, super easy to try, and even easier to know you're buying just enough swimsuit, I guess is the analogy.
Yeah.
No extra.
All right, bullet number 4. Now, now in all this, we're finally talking about the admins and how we make it easier for them, and making it easier for them to manage their workloads and hibernate clusters and turn them back on. Am I repeating myself? This is the next section, right? This is different than the last bullet.
Yeah. So this one's good for. So when you set up clusters, you bring your own AWS account for AWS, right? So all the compute charges, all the AWS charges go directly to the customer. You're only paying for the software license for Nutanix. Everything else is all to AWS. And so what happens is when you're not needing those workloads, or if you need to scale the cluster down, you can scale it back down when you're not using the cluster. So for example, we have a test cluster that we use for things. I don't leave that running 24/7, or I get in trouble by Nutanix for incurring cost I don't need. And I get daily Bing reports saying this is what you're using for cloud consumption. So with the time I'm not using that cluster, I just hibernate it. And what it does is through our portal, you just click hibernate, and it puts through everything in a hibernation state, releases those nodes, and you're only paying for the storage costs while those are hibernated. Then when you want to resume, you go back in the cluster's portal, click resume, it wakes those up, and then basically you're back and running where you were before. So that way, again, you're only paying for compute costs when you need them.
And Jared, I'm going to ask a question I already know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that's, we're using bare metal here. We're not using some type of nested hypervisor scenario. This is where the maturity of the AWS platform is, where they're actually able to hibernate physical machines. And that's, we're not using nested. And that's why AWS is first, just because they had that hardware platform management portfolio for you guys to integrate with, right? I mean, that's what caused them to be first.
Yep, correct. They're all metal nodes. So if you go out to their site and look at the different metal node options, we have 4 types that we support today, and probably look at others in the future depending on their configuration. But yes, these are bare metal nodes, and I'm going blank here on the acquisition, but they had an acquisition they made to where we can directly hit APIs on the silicon. And that's why they were first, because we can do that bare metal node provisioning through APIs, do things like resume, hibernate, increase capacity, decrease capacity, and destroy without having to even physically touch anything in their data center.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a real economic kind of force multiplier, right? Because if it was on-prem with maybe with GPUs, right, we'd have to get creative if somebody was trying to squeeze all the value out of the cluster to say, okay, at night you run, machine learning workloads on this to use the GPUs and get value out of the nodes. Whereas here it's like, there's basically no cost, the other 16 hours of the day that you're not having users on it.
And speaking of GPU nodes, we don't have GPU nodes today, but it's something that we're looking at. So if you guys have customers that are interested in GPU nodes, let us know as well, so that the product team can know, so they can prioritize that.
Yeah. Jaron, you mentioned a couple times Prism. It's fair to say that all things Prism Central apply too, right? All these different Prism environments, no matter where they're at, that all still works too, right?
Yep. So just like the same thing, multiple clusters. Each cluster will have their own Prism elements, and then you can manage multiple clusters with the same Prism Central. Have a separate Prism Central for clusters, or any way you want to do it. But yeah, you can still use Prism Central for multi-cluster management, whether the cluster is on-prem, in clusters, or doing both at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, and I try to bring it up as much as I can. You use the exact same tools on-prem that you can now use for the public cloud, and I think that for a lot of people that was unimaginable in the past couple of years. It was always that big learning curve of, oh man, I got to learn AWS, or oh man, I've got to learn Azure, and now you don't have to do that anymore, that's a huge deal. And I think that's something that needs to be out there and said, especially on bare metal, and not have to worry about the separate instance sizes and being locked to those.
I think it's both, right? Because you don't have to be the AWS rocket surgeon to get all the value out of it, but you get the benefit of like what can I do with cloud as a platform, right? Like hardware as a service as a platform, like, for like hardware recoveries, right? Whereas on-prem, if you shed a disk in a cluster, right, SSD burns out, you're waiting on, a courier to bring you a new disk and then go replace it and then reheal and all that stuff. Here we can detect that, right, through the control plane, provision a new node, expand the cluster automatically, eject the old node, and just fail forward onto new, healthy hardware and not have to worry about timelines to heal sick hardware. Which is
Right.
something you only get when your foundation is a hardware as a service platform.
Yeah, you make a great point there, because if there's an issue with the node, you can easily eject the node or condemn the node inside of the cluster's portal, and it automatically reprovisions a new node for you right there. So you don't have to worry about waiting for hardware like you do on-prem or anything like that. It automatically reprovisions that, adds to the cluster, and you're still running within minutes on that node.
So the last bullet here, Nutanix clusters use the exact same AHV plugin. I think we talked about the plugin early in this conversation. So there's no secret sauce in the plugin for the clusters on AWS. It's just the same thing, and all the things Jari mentioned a while ago about keeping it up to date and not relying on Citrix to do it and not relying on AWS to do it. That applies here, right?
Yep, same exact plugins, no difference. All Prism Element integration like you do on-prem. All the same plugins, MCS, PVS, Director, all those same plugins work.
Yeah. The next section of the blog to really cover is the use cases. So on-demand elasticity, kind of a no-brainer, right? In this new cloud era.
Yep, you need a burst. There you go. Use that as capacity, because again, we have this time where people needed the kits on-prem, we possibly couldn't get them to them. So faster to spin up a cluster if you need to burst out to that use case, and the exact nature of what the demo video and the blog post shows.
And that's really not only elasticity, but also DR, right? That covers the ability to have that environment up and going at all times. And if you need more of it, you can easily get it going.
Yep. So for DR, have your pilot light nodes, so 3 nodes minimum. Replicate over to that, hibernate it, and then wake it up again when you do more replication. Periodically you wake it up, replicate to it, hibernate it, and then keep doing that. Dwayne Lesnar, a team member of ours, he has a blog out there on automating that using the APIs. But stay tuned for more capabilities around that as well.
Man, I hadn't even thought about hibernating the pilot light nodes. That's actually really cool.
Yep, that way you're not incurring those compute costs all the time. You're just using the storage costs. So periodically wake it up, replicate, hibernate it, and then do that like maybe once a week, twice a week, whatever your RPO, RTO is. Just do it automatically so it's not on 24/7 occurring compute charges.
And then the kid brother of DR, business continuity, right? We saw that rear its head in 2020. Obviously, this enables that. Whether you do what Jarman was just talking about, where you turn it on every so often and replicate, okay, great. But what if you just always have a few nodes running over there, and some users go over there? Maybe the IT guys, maybe guys that are a little more latency tolerant. But it's the ability to have all your eggs in multiple baskets. This really goes a long way doing that without having to retrain the brain. Anything else regarding business continuity, guys, that you would want to call out that this enables?
No, the main thing there is that also you mentioned have some workloads because of latency and so forth, but always got to account for user data and applications to make sure that's not impacting user experience.
Yeah. This other use case around lift and shift, I think we kind of covered that over and over again around the idea that you don't have to retrain yourself, but obviously lift and shift is super easy in this concept, and you don't have to, like Harvey was talking about, learning a different platform. You're done.
And the nice thing here too is that you don't have to have any Nutanix on-prem to use clusters. You can start with clusters in the cloud, learn Nutanix that way, get up and quickly, and then once your hardware comes in, you can replicate things back over and then figure out where you want to put your workloads or what use case you want to use clusters for going forward.
And Jarian, and I make this up every once in a while when I think about it, but is the concept of a true live migration doable?
So I wouldn't say yet. But today it's more of using our replication technologies, but I'm sure that could possibly happen at some point.
Mhm.
I guess more would come into as far as the connection speed and latency and that kind of stuff across the pipe. But potentially.
Yeah, it's live in 5.19 actually. You can do AHV cross cluster live migration. Latency, as always, is the giant asterisk, right? So if you're using virtual VPN appliances to remote data centers, that's going to be a different experience than say like a faster, more direct pipe from cluster to cluster. But ultimately, yeah, the tech is live in AHV.
Cool. You guys have all the answers. Unless you don't want to have the answer, then you kind of talk around the answer a little bit. I'm just kidding. This is my third podcast of the day. It's getting silly for me.
I think punchier podcasts are in general better podcasts.
Migration, leverage public clouds for migrating Citrix workloads to AHV. What is this covering, Jari?
So think about a use case where maybe today your vSphere on your data center and you want to migrate to AHV, but you don't have the capacity to flip the nodes. So what you could do is replicate those workloads to clusters, redeploy your cluster on AHV and flip them back. Or say you're standing up a new version of virtual apps and desktops and you don't want to do an in-place upgrade and you don't have the capacity for in test environments, use clusters as that test or pilot, testing things out and then upgrade your on-prem. So those kind of use cases, whether it's Windows operating systems, virtual apps and desktop versions, the hypervisor software deployed, think about this migration use cases to use clusters for.
Yeah, you just said the keyword pilot, and love the idea that you could just extend up here, do your pilot, and then bring it back for the on-premises.
Yep.
Production piece.
Yeah, usually most customers only have a handful, small percentage point where the VMs are like, I want to test this on AHV, make sure it works well. And the idea of sort of almost like renting a test environment is actually, fantastic.
Or think about another use case where customers have those bigger clusters and they take longer maintenance windows. So shift that over to clusters and just redeploy on-prem and then move them back as well as another use case.
Yeah, Harvey, he runs around with his own block and does that for customers. It's not a very scalable thing. But it's a very sellable thing. You go do that for a customer, they will love you and they will buy from you most of the time. All right, so how do we get started with this? There's the test drive option and the free 30-day trial. Talk me through both of those. Yeah,
so the test drive, you can go to our site, sign up for it. The biggest thing on the test drive, though, is that you can't connect that back to on-prem, I believe. That's going to deploy a new VPC, so you can't have one that's already plumbed to your data center. That's the biggest difference there. For the 30-day test trial, that's going to give you basically full access. You can deploy to an existing VPC that you already have connected back to your data center. You bring your own AWS account, and then you go from there.
Yeah, good. I mean, Harvey, you and Jaira did this on the fly for a customer not too many days ago, or fairly quickly, right? It didn't take long at all.
Yeah. It's still going on. They're still testing through it, and things have been actually great. So it's been a good project for them too.
Yeah, the initial stand up, took an hour. Like we all just kind of hopped on a conference call and did it. They already had their VPN connectivity plumbed up, so that of course makes it easy.
Yep.
You don't need it as step one, but if you want to replicate VMs as soon as you're done building the cluster, then of course you gotta have plumbing for that.
Right. Networking is very, very important. It is always important.
And that takes the longest to get done.
Yes, it does.
So, guys, we've spent this entire podcast talking about the application workload, in this case being Citrix, but this really just applies to every application workload, right? I mean, Citrix just happens to be the one that just got played out in this one, right?
Yep. You can, do files on it. You can do other application workloads. I mainly just focus on the Citrix aspect on it, but yeah, there's really no limit to what you can do as far as application workloads.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, Andy, that you would say that, because I felt the exact opposite when you started that remark. I thought you were going to say we talked about everything but Citrix.
Well, and Jarian, that's what I was going to say is, this, as I said a little while ago, our listeners are often Citrix and Nutanix users. So anytime you want to come back, let us know. This is perfect. It hits a couple sweet spots for our community.
Absolutely.
And I brought the comment up just now about all applications being similar here, because it's not just for VDI and Citrix. It's for pretty much all applications that need compute, and you don't want to go, learn two technologies, learn Nutanix and take it to your public cloud with you.
Yeah, always happy to come back on and talk about any other things. We update it as things progress. Because I know there's things within our team we're pushing to help ease the burden on Citrix admins on Nutanix, but I can't go too deep into that right now.
Yeah. I have one for you. The customer we spoke to this morning, they made the automatic assumption that Nutanix on Azure meant you were paying for Nutanix plus Azure, and it had to be astronomically expensive. Is that something you could address?
Yeah, so the main thing with clusters for this, you are going to pay for our software, so your AWS licensing. But as far as the hardware and cloud consumption, that's all going to be from the cloud provider. Now, as far as Nutanix licensing, we do have CBL you can use, so you can transfer that over. We also have pay-as-you-go, and I believe Cloud Commit is another option. But I know we're looking at other licensing options as well to help with the AOS software licensing piece.
So is it fair to say you're saving money? You're using the hardware from AWS, but you're not paying for their operating system, so you're bringing your own Nutanix one. So is it going to be similar in cost?
Yes, of course. As far as the hardware side, you're going to be paying for whatever the cloud consumption model is. And like AWS, they have reserved instances and dedicated instances type stuff to kind of where you can pay for X amount for a certain time frame to get some of the cost savings on the hardware. They don't guarantee the hardware in some of those cases. They do help you with kind of modeling the cost out over a number of years. But as far as saving cost, that's a good question.
But it also would come down to hibernation and how much you're using it for. What are you comparing it to? If you're gonna go procure hardware, right? Fundamentally, you got to put that somewhere, right? So then you have colo, power and cooling, availability. So there's certain costs that might shift or flex as you kind of compare apples to apples.
Yep, exactly. You're more just managing the software on it instead of actually managing hardware, networking, and all those other pieces, and having to worry about an actual physical location.
Right. Yeah. And also, and just philosophically, right? Like buying hardware, it's hard to operationalize on-prem hardware. I'm not saying it's impossible, but in general, you're going to buy that, which means you're probably going to rebuy that at some point, compared to, as with most things cloud, if you're going to budget for 4 nodes, steady state of a certain cost, you can pretty much bet that if you are willing to always budget that amount, what you get for that cost is going to always improve, right? Like you're never going to get hit with a hardware cost increase and get less per pound.
It's possible it's going to improve and get cheaper, but no guarantee, right?
Right.
Also, too, as far as one thing we earlier mentioned was availability. So we support all of the locations that is supported by AWS for the 4 node types we support today. So if you go out there and look, you can find US East, US West. You can find all throughout the world. We just recently also announced GovCloud support for US East and US West as well. So there's plenty of options for different locations based on regional availability and trying to get something more close to you. Also, too, you can go multi-cloud with this. So when we support other clouds like Azure, you can have one in AWS, one on-prem, and one in Azure as well. But you can also do redundancy across multiple availability zones in the cloud as well. So when you're thinking about building this out and scaling out or building for redundancy, you have all kinds of options, whether it's multi-cloud, multi-availability zone. But the message here that we're mostly going with it is hybrid cloud and being able to build up that true hybrid cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, and really preserving organizational agility, right? Like I don't care if you pick, Cloud A, and tomorrow, the executive says, we're going to partner with Cloud B in a strategic fashion, right? From cluster to cluster, that's going to be like the easiest cloud migration of all time.
Absolutely.
As long as the networking's there, you're good to go.
Yeah, right. As usual.
I've been telling a lot of customers the last couple of years, spin a little something up in this cloud and one in that cloud, so you can't be hostage. But this is truly kind of universal, and you could move it, but you don't have to redo it. And we've talked about that some in the podcast here, but yeah,
Right.
I like that idea that look, you can jack me up on the price over here, but all I got to do is copy it over to there and turn it back on.
That's
Watch out.
it.
Exactly. Spin up another cluster, use our built-in replication technologies, move the workloads, and power down the other cloud resources.
That's great. Hey, Jarian, when are you gonna have your Azure clusters ready?
Hey, I'm waiting so we can start testing, because that's one thing our team will do is we'll test and make a reference architecture guide for it. And today we have those out there for AWS, but we're hoping to start testing Azure soon so we can get those same guides deployed out there. So when customers start looking at it, they can look at the differences between Azure hardware and AWS hardware to see what the difference in scalability and performance is.
Yeah. Well, guys, I got some business to go handle. I appreciate you jumping on. This has been phenomenal. Jarian, we'll have you on again. Anything before we let you go? Anything coming up in your world that you want listeners to know about?
No, right now I'm more in the files world right now. So a lot of things that we're getting asked about is different profile container solutions on files and performance and scalability and just solutions guide. So that's where my time is starting to steer towards. So FS Logics is the first one, app layering another one, profile management, user personalization layers, and testing all that stuff to make sure that our files infrastructure is performing properly for it, but we also have the capabilities that we need to help customers when it comes to profile container solutions.
No love for my PVS file store? I got to have my PVS.
I can do that too, but that's not a priority right now. Right now, everything I'm getting hit for is FS Logics and app layering. So
We are talking about that a lot.
Yeah, app layering and FS Logics. That's one of the great things about your solution is it can be there, it can be local to the node, and that can't be any faster than that.
Yep.
Tell me if it's too soon to tell, Jarian, but is anything standing out as the happiest path if customers are looking at all of them?
It depends what they need. But we're seeing FS Logics, the main one right now, because of course, after the acquisition of Microsoft, most customers are entitled to it. And so that's kind of the leader in that space. And so they're looking at that one.
Makes sense.
You kind of got to have it for that Outlook cache.
Yep.
Right.
Jaira, how about you? Anything else going on in your world that you'd want listeners to know about? Anything exciting?
Pretty boring for me. Nope, nothing specific to plug. As usual, take a test drive if anything sounded interesting.
Harvey?
I guess I'm pretty boring this time too. We just had the Nutanix workshop, so definitely take a look out there at events.XenTegra.com. Be on the lookout for the next few that are coming up, and sign up. And we're ready to educate.
Yeah, we just love watching people light up when they get to see the technology for the first time. It's seeing Nutanix for the first time actually come together. That's a memorable moment for me. Seeing Citrix for the first time, seeing VMware for the first time. Those are just moments in your IT career that they only come around every so often.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you for the time. We'll do it again in a few weeks.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Talk to y'all.
All right.